Okay, folks, good afternoon. It's Dr. John Taylor Kent. I was going to go by the natural lighting with the shade pulled. The awning is in because the winds are just too strong. Spent about $3,000 to put the last one out there, and I don't feel like doing that again or making an insurance claim, so I'm not taking any chances. But I like the other picture where it shows me holding up this Bible and you can read the title properly. This is the Bible you want to get. 2015, done by a wonderful committee of really incredibly gifted men and women. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I was asked by the publisher what I wanted, and I told him I wanted two things. The tallest order is I want a modern English version of the Apocrypha. And that's a tall order. It's really pretty rough. There's not as much research done on the Apocrypha, 14 books, as there is on the King James, what we call the King James proper. Now, the King James original of 1611 had the 14 apocryphal books, but the source of those is suspect in my mind because they're missing verses compared to the New Revised Standard version, which has got much more verses. And I think the difference is that the King James took from the Latin Vulgate, and I believe that the New Revised Standard took from the High Latin. I don't know exactly, but this is what you want to get. This is where the link will take you, so you can get a copy of this one. This is large print. I rather like it. Gilded pages, and you can see that you can read that pretty good, I think. A little fuzzy from here to my eyes. Maybe it's not focusing very well. There we go. That's a little bit better. Now, follow the link. Buy the Bible. It's the cheapest price you're going to get. There's several versions available, and what I mean by that is you've got the leatherette, and you've also got what we consider the study Bible, which is slightly smaller. This is large print. I had to wait for this. It's special. This is my third version of this Bible. I got one of the early study Bibles in paperback. It had really nice large margins on it for writing on it. I gave it to a dear friend who collects Bibles, who's read more Bibles than anybody else I know, and who's most familiar with the most versions of the Bible. And I wanted him to have it, and he went over it, and there's some key verses he checks on that he gauges all the other Bibles by, and he was impressed with this version quite a bit. The stuff he gets into is pretty advanced, and I really couldn't tell you what it is. I'd have to have him remind me anyway. Look, folks, you got to understand that the enemies of America are really big. And right now, it's the enemies of the United States of America, this corporate government, which is very justified. And the fact is, you're kept in the dark, treated like a mushroom. You and I have no access to the information. We can't get to the truth. They won't give it to us. They won't even allow the universities to teach the best of the base of knowledge. They won't allow the best science forward. We can't even have discussions about it anymore. No more free discussions. And in case you're wondering, the enemies are people that you know, names that you've heard of in this country in particular. And you've got some of them that interfered in the last election and bought it. Between two gentlemen, they paid $1 billion to throw things off. And that would be between George Soros and Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg spent $400 million, Soros spent $600 million. And they put in all of these contracts and these people who controlled the polling. So that's why they don't permit us to talk about the truth about what happened in those elections, because they're guilty. They're guilty of undermining the will of the American people. They're guilty of high treason. They'll never be brought to justice because they control everything. They control all the law enforcement. They control all the corporations, all the universities of higher education, pretty much all the institutions of higher education. They control all the professions. They control the medical doctors, the attorneys, and yes, the goddamn psychologists, of which I don't know if I'm one or not anymore. You tell me. You probably don't regard me as one. I certainly don't have a license to practice anywhere. And I'm not going to submit to another board. They're full of liberal jackasses, and when they find out you're conservative, they give you nothing but grief. And the sad thing is that I'm going to guess that back when I was practicing, and we're talking at the beginning of this century, there were probably 15% of psychologists were conservatives. The rest were libtards. Since then, it's much less. We're probably down to 5, 6, 7%. And of course, the nice thing is that if you're a conservative and you go to a libtard, they're going to screw you up. It's guaranteed. They're going to make you dependent. Their views, their outlook, their basic philosophy just can't hold a candle to ours. And the problem is when we get into trouble, we don't have much to turn to. And I'll tell you what's really hard is as a psychologist to get good care and good treatment. You pretty much can't get it. You can go to the old guys, but most of them are libtards on top of it. Anyway, there aren't many of the old guys left. And I guess at this point, I'm one of them. Jordan Peterson is one of them. I think I'm older than he is. He's on the top of his game. I peaked probably, getting close to 20 years, 15 years ago. So I have not kept up with the literature. Of course, I was so advanced that I don't really need to keep up. So advanced it's hard for me to explain to these libtards and defend my practice, defend my license. I don't want to hassle with them again, so I'm not going to do it. I don't need the stress or the strain. They went after me pretty badly, and they did that because they wanted to protect their governor, Janet Napolitano, in the state of Arizona. She had her husband, or is it wife? Doris Shrero, she's married to her now. They finally legitimized that marriage of theirs. And of course, it was against Arizona state law for a governor to appoint a family member underneath them because you really can't supervise your family member very well. Nevertheless, she appointed Doris Shrero, her college roommate and her lifelong partner, to the cabinet position underneath her. But of course, people were too dumb back then. Although after I made a report to the state police, the fellow who was the number 2 man, he figured it out. He was the one that informed me that I was accusing them of violating the state law. Well, I didn't know the law, but she sure as hell was violating it. Oh, and in case you're wondering, about $1 million a year goes from the Arizona Department of Corrections all the way up. And it gets, those people aren't really paid enough, and their retirements aren't good enough, so they break the law and pad it. So, in my estimation, they were taking $1 million a year, probably the last century. So probably today, it's probably much more money. And in case you're wondering how they do that, they have this little game they play with the locks. So they'll request the locks, and they'll require let's just take one example. The one that the officer was sliced up at, and his deputy warden in response had a full-blown heart attack and died. Lumke, I think was his name. He was killed before I was brought on board. But at Perryville, they could unlock their cells with a string. The mechanisms were that old, that worn out, that the inmates had more control than the officers did. And the inmates ran the place. And if they wanted to talk to you face to face or a little closer to have a little bit more privacy, they'd say, wait a minute, pull a string and step outside the cell and talk to you. And the officers couldn't do anything about it. All the cells were like that. And so, for a year and a half at least, the deputy warden every month would send a memo in downtown to that jackass who was so full of himself. I think he's got a felony charge right now for shooting at the police while he was drunk. Son of a bitch, Ryan. Mr. Ryan. I met him once. And he sent his goons over after me one time. Man, I can't believe how the Spirit worked on me that day and saved my life, because they were there to kill me. And if they possibly could do it, they were going to do it as a favor to Mr. Ryan. Why? Because I had the audacity to talk on my radio show at the time and tell the truth. And the truth was the deaths were on Mr. Ryan because he failed. He refused to honor the request for new locks at Perryville. Every month the request would go in. Every month, DW, Ron Odom would get a letter rejecting his request. And then I had a buddy, made a friend. He had been working security, mostly down in Tucson. Brainy guy, smart son of a bitch, really intelligent. He should have made more of himself. He should have gone and gotten a doctorate somewhere. I mean, he was almost wicked intelligent. And he was the one that was doing the locks and programming things up and running security. And he didn't have the parts. And he put in for the parts, he never got them. And one day he's out on the yard and there's a tarp covering a big pile of stuff. Some sort of equipment, gear was under there. So he lifted the tarp up and looked. All those locks he needed to maintain security were underneath there, brand new. $1 million worth of locks right there in the yard. And he said, wow, he was happy because he needed these locks. He was going to be able to do his job. And they told him, not so fast. Don't touch that. That's marked for salvage. We've got a contractor coming to take it out, take it to the garbage, take it to the dump. So that's what they pulled on the state of Arizona, is they pulled a set of frauds. And I'm just going to take a guess. I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet you that the guy they hired to take it to the dump was getting paid off as part of the scheme, and they took it to the dump at somebody's warehouse, and they resold them to the Department of Corrections. They did that like clockwork. As a matter of fact, one of the governors got $1 million from his part of the take of that. And what did he do with his $1 million? He ran to become president. He became Secretary of, what was it? The Interior, I think. And he and his son used a state's helicopter to run dope up from Mexico on a regular basis. And the jets over there at that Air Force base on the west side of Phoenix would scramble because a plane that was invading our airspace, and they'd get out there and they'd be told, stand down. It's just the governor's son out there in a helicopter on their dope run. They must have smoked a lot of dope up on that governor's office on that floor. But he only had $1 million to run for president, and he lost out to that jackass Bill Clinton, who had $10 million to run for president. How did Bill Clinton get $10 million? It was his take on the Mena, Arkansas cocaine deal. He's getting a whopping 10% out of it. $10 million bucks. So he put that to work for himself so he could run for and become president. I approached the governor a couple of times about this, and she refused to meet with me. Basically, the reason that the original governor went after me, and I didn't realize it, that went after me through my board. See, each one of them had been appointed by the governor to the Arizona Board of Psychologist Examiners. So they had to protect their liberal Democrat governor because they're all liberal Democrats. That's the way it works. It's been a two-tiered system with two different paths of justice for a long time. And so that continues to this day. They keep on doing the same lock scam, as far as I can tell. Don't hold me to it. I just piece things together, and I basically got a fellow, we'll just call him Mr. Smith just to make it easy, but he explained to me this deal. And they tried to take his life on 2 occasions. They had him beat up pretty badly. So he suffers from them to this day. So the Department of Corrections really is corrupt as hell. And you see, what they went after me for is I'm the one that turned in the psychiatrist that killed a bunch of inmates with his medicines. Contract psychiatrist that didn't know what the hell he was doing. He was licensed by the Arizona has a unique board, and the credential when you sign your name is MD with an H in parentheses. So it's a medical doctor of homeopathy and integrated medicine or alternative medicine. So they got that fancy license, which requires a regular medical degree to get it. And this guy obviously wasn't trained properly at all, because he didn't even know what the damn doses of the medicines were. The nurses had to help him out. And some of these medicines that are used in psychiatry are extremely dangerous. And the worst thing, there's several bad things that they can do. But one of the worst things is that it can cause a leukemia that, if not caught within the first 6 weeks of onset, is irreversible. And that's what happened to an inmate that they transferred from, I don't think he was in the walls, but he was in Arizona State Prison Complex, Florence, and they transferred him to St. Mary's Hospital in Tucson. They gave him a full blood transfusion and he died. So of course they buried the evidence. They buried it in the medical records and they buried it in the ground. And that wasn't the only one the guy killed. There were several others that died. Unnecessary inmate deaths due to medical malpractice, because the guy didn't give a damn, and DOC's willing to cover up the murders. Plus, they covered up, he billed us for more hours than he worked. And he had the help of the psychiatric nurses who were checking him in and out. So they wrote in times that he checked out at the end of the day at 5 o'clock. Bullshit, he was gone by 11 o'clock almost every day. Never later than 11, maybe 10. I think he had to run another line one time for a favor for one of those nurses helping him to defraud the government. And of course, the people downtown, that woman downtown, what was her name? Head of the mental health department. She signed off on all that, so she was guilty of malfeasance. And then also, I'm the one who got the student loan repayment from the federal government for the Arizona Department of Corrections. And I worked with Kayla West for close to a year. And at the very end of that, they wanted to fax the documents to me to sign off. And at that point, I had to back off. You see, the people downtown didn't give a damn about us. They didn't care if we were strapped with those horrible debts. And they didn't care that, we were working so damn hard in their prisons, and they certainly weren't paying us a fair wage for what we were doing. Some people only getting $52,000 a year as a psychologist, and it's not a very fair wage. It should be $100,000. I didn't get anywhere near that. Anyway, downtown was upset because I had worked and gotten it for all of DOC, and they were pissed because they were caught negligent. They didn't do what they should do. I'll remember that woman's name at some point. She retired in Vermont. I think she went to Belize, as a matter of fact. She was a horrible borderline, just like my supervisor. Very, very terrible individuals, very corrupt. As a matter of fact, Kayla West was very disenchanted when she found out that I didn't get qualified for the student loan repayment. She was upset because I had done all the work. I was the one responsible for getting it to happen. But my boss, Dr. Suzanne Arnold, who treated sex offenders, and the treatment included having sex with the offenders, I've always asked the question, did Dr. Suzanne Arnold practice safe sex? I asked that on the radio. She's still got a license, and she works with kids. Well, that's the last I heard. It's been quite a while. I don't check on these people. I don't give a damn what happens to them. I do know that Yahweh created a path for me. Those folks tried to destroy me and cheat me out of my retirement. They fired me, tried to fire me 3 months before I was going to vest in the retirement system. And what I didn't know, and they didn't know, is I had already vested in the retirement system. So I got a retirement out of it. Hallelujah. It's not much of a check. It's about half of what I should have gotten if I'd have been able to go the full course. Anyway, Dr. Suzanne Arnold was fired, and then I guess they had to backtrack, and they had a big investigation, and they changed the paperwork. Why? Because Arizona is one of 6 states, at least at that time, that was permitted by the Supreme Court of the United States to keep sex offenders past the dates of incarceration under the guise of necessary treatment. And there was no treatment program. There was a good treatment program that was contracted out of Tucson. And those people were very good at what they did. And it should have been an outside contractor anyway. Just based upon pure ethics, it needed to be an outsider. But no, they brought it inside, and they lied on the records so they would make these guys look worse than what they were so that they could keep them past the date of sentencing under the guise of treatment. And that happened to one of the inmates I was working with, and I was pretty pissed off because they had used me that way. And they gave me a bunch of shit about it, that's my job. Well, I knew that the sex offender treatment program there, Dr. Goldie and the 2 women working with him, were getting these men to imagine, to fabricate ideations, sexual ideations, and writing it down and encouraging them, reinforcing, oh, that's very good. What more can you tell me? So they've created these records, false record, that basically showed the need for treatment. Now, why did they do that? Because they got paid to treat. It's a big scam. In case you're wondering, the whole thing's a big scam because they make money off men's souls. That's where the selling of men's souls occurs. You know, that part of the Bible where it says they deal in men's souls? You haven't read the Bible? You don't know that part? It stands right out. Go find it. Go read it. Go buy my Bible. Follow the link. Buy the Bible. Sit on your butt and read it. I think that might be in the book of Revelations. Not really sure. Don't hold me to it. I've read the whole thing a few times. And I'm in this new version. And I just haven't read enough. I've maybe read parts of it one time. And I really need to get a couple more readings in. So anyway, the state of Arizona, like every other state, is corrupt and has been corrupted by the central government. It's the same way with Child Protective Services. The central government rewards those state bastards for kidnapping the children and selling them on the market. Some of them actually get sold into sexual shit by the state. Arizona does it. All of the states do that shit. So they take the real pretty ones, the ones that are in demand that they can make some money off, and that's what they do. And a lot of those kids, especially in Arizona, there was a cute little girl, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and the reports were made that she was being abused in foster care, and the state did not step in. She died. I think she was age 4 or 5. Anyway, there's a lot of victims like that. And the biggest dealer of child sex trafficking in the world is the United States government through the Child Protective Services. Anyway, it's pretty corrupt. And the inmates told me this stuff, and I just didn't pay enough attention. I was just trying to do my job. And also trying not to get into trouble, because the inmates, if they could manipulate you and play you, they would. And I avoided that pretty well. But I couldn't avoid the problems with the administration. Even though the inmates warned me about it well in advance, there was nothing I could do. They liked me. They let me know they were watching out for me. They told me what they could, and they told me that there wasn't much that could be done about it. So they set me up on false allegations to run me out. I've still got those reports. Arizona Department of Corrections will have destroyed those records because they don't want to take a chance of getting caught on this stuff. I would love to be made whole. I think they damaged me pretty badly. I think they owe me. But they're never going to do anything about it. I'm pretty grateful to have the retirement and the medical benefits I have now. The inmates told me the federal government reimbursed the state for every day they housed an inmate at a certain rate, and the state paid far less than that to house the inmates. So in other words, it was to the financial benefit of the state to fill its coffers with money made by wrongly keeping these guys imprisoned. Doesn't matter that Arizona's got a false conviction rate of, I would guess, double what the rest of the nation has, maybe outside of some parts in the Deep South. I'm not sure about Texas. I know some people that work there. I could probably ask them, but I don't want to talk shop with them, with anybody anymore. Not getting paid for it, that's for sure. So the state makes money by keeping men in prison. So they've made all these things into wicked felonies, and they throw people away for a long time. They ruin their lives. They don't give a shit about that because the state's making money off it. So there you have the corporation of Arizona masquerading as a state government that's doing this ugly stuff. That's why these state governments need to be replaced with organic governments. You've got to get rid of the profit motivation and the registering of these governments and these courts on Dun and Bradstreet. They're all there. They're all registered as corporations. All corporations are under the one big corporation under the Vatican, in case you're wondering. And Satan owns that son of a bitch for sure. So he owns all that stuff. And, you know, the Board of Psychologists Examiners voted twice to restore my license, and that one jackass, Gary Lovejoy, he threw the monkey wrench in there a couple of times. And if he'd have just left me alone, I would have gotten another job. Actually, I got another job. I got another job in Idaho, another one in Montana. No, it was South Dakota. I got a couple of other jobs. And if they'd have left me alone, I would have retired the license in Arizona and gone to work up in Idaho. And I wouldn't be able to talk about it then because I'd have to stay secret about it all because they'd take my license away. These boards are loaded with libtards. They have destroyed the profession of psychology across the country. I tell you to stay away from the psychologists. They aren't very helpful. They'll just make you dependent, or they'll require you to adopt their liberal values. You see, they preach coexistence, acceptance, but they sure don't practice it. They marginalize, ostracize, and pathologize all conservatives to get rid of us as fast as they can. And if they can't do it any other way, then they turn to psychiatry to get their help in doing it. They're a bunch of bastards. However, they're not all a bunch of bastards. The president of the board, when I went before the board, and I wish I knew his name to recognize him properly, I believe he was a gentleman out of Tucson, he actually stood up for me against the board when the board wanted to make leaving Arizona part of the consent agreement. They wanted me to leave the jurisdiction and not come back, and they were reminded by the Attorney General and by the President of the board that, hey, this isn't the communist Soviet Union. Yeah, it is. We were just on slow boil all these years, and they wanted to do that with me. Well, it sure would have been nice if they had left me alone, but then I probably wouldn't have. There's a lot of things that would have been nice. Not stroking would have been nice, but then I wouldn't have read the Bible. I wouldn't have realized what's important. And also, if I didn't have that retirement, the disability that I drew for quite a while, and then the retirement, then I wouldn't have had the time to sit on my ass and read the Bible. And it took 18 months of reading the Bible to get my mind working again, to get my short-term working memory going again. And it's still not as strong as it once was, nowhere near as strong. And under conditions of stress, I don't do as well. So in that sense, I'm not fit for the practice of psychology, mostly because I'm unable to defend my license. So I've become defenseless, and I admit it. And I had trouble recounting a story back to the neuropsychologist who was examining me. And when I realized that, and he realized that, he didn't say anything. He just sat there and looked at me as I told him, I'm not safe to practice. I can't conduct psychotherapy anymore. And he just sat there because he knew that me coming to that conclusion was the best way to handle the whole thing. It was at that point that I decided to retire my license and not fight or argue with the board ever again. And I went before them one last time. I do have a recording of that. It will show their motivation, the motivation to wreck and ruin me. They were shocked because I had the funds to go to court. And my attorney assured them that I had money enough to go to court. So we were going to have that hearing. And they thought that they had wasted all of my insurance, defensive licensure coverage. Well, I had the big one. I took out the maximum policy. And when they filed the last stuff, I filed a new claim. So instead of being worn down in my war chest, I had a full 50 grand to go against them at that time. The problem was that in order to go to Idaho and defend the license, it was going to cost $175,000. So why spend at minimum? Why spend? And that's what the attorney told me up there. He says, "Don't come up here. It's going to cost you $175,000." So that, these boards stick together. It is a communist nation. It's a big, big, giant club, and you and I aren't members of it. You need to understand that we're dealing with the enemy of mankind. And most of the libtards don't realize who they're serving. Some of them worship Satan openly, though. And they serve Moloch and Baal. And they've had ceremonies on our soil here dedicating the baby, dedicating this country to their God. They are wicked and they are evil. And I know you don't believe me and you think I'm a nut. Fine. And I know you think, well, nobody would do that. Why would they do that? You need to understand, you're not like them. You cannot comprehend them. They are beyond your scope of imagination even. Way outside of the domain of your experience and your ability to understand. Psychologists have trouble with them, and we don't agree upon it among ourselves. So you're being run by a bunch of sociopaths. I know you want to call them psychopaths. That's not the right term. I'm not sure I've ever met a true psychopath. I think they've all been sociopaths. Now I learned there's two subtypes. There's primary and secondary. And I guess secondary are the social ones that develop socially, and primary refers to the ones that are born that way, that are biological. In case you're wondering, those wonderful families out of Venice, that's the root of most of your sociopaths. In case you're wondering, Vlad the Impaler out of Romania was a giant, and he wasn't that far back. And all of the royalty from Europe pretty much descended from him. At least that's the rumor. And so you also have the Rothschilds, whose name was originally Bauer, but they decided to call themselves Red Shield. Rothschild, after the red shield emblem they used to mark their business on Judenstrasse. And they were Ashkenazi, and they don't practice the Jewish religion, so I don't see how they can call themselves Jews. I think they are very much descendants of the Canaanites, the Edomites of Cain. So I'm trying to give you as much info as I can at one time. I think we've covered a lot. I've gotten lost in the dialogue here myself. It's a very corrupt world we live in. There's not much we can do. There's some things that are happening, and there's things happening in so many other domains, so many other spheres, that it's hard to sort it all out, to juggle it and keep it separated. You need to know that the bad guys know what's coming. They know who they are. Nothing happens by accident. They're doing everything. They're orchestrating it all. They control those political jackasses in Washington, D.C. Every one of them is controlled. And most all of your stars and conservative talk radio are controlled by them. Especially Glenn Beck and his buddy from Fox News, what's his name? Michael Savage calls him the leprechaun. O'Reilly, Bill O'Reilly. And then you got Sean, what's his name? I want to say Kennedy, but that's not it. Sean is a real, he's a, what does he call everybody? What do they call him? A brave American? He's a jackass. He actually carries the weight, the water for the other party. You've got what you call the Republicans and the Democrats. They're two wings of the same dirty bird. And you just have communist heavy, and they do want to euthanize you. And you got communist light or socialist light. And they're part and parcel of this current genocide that's begun as well. They know what's coming because it's in the Bible. And they're doing their best to dig in and prevail. They've been through several of these earth ages before, from what I can tell. At least 6 of them. And they plan upon surfacing from the giant event in a manner that lets them rule the roost. So they're trying to avoid competition, and they're whacking as many of us as they can, knowing full well that there's going to be really, really mass confusion. And so they're hoping in the confusion they can get away with their crimes again. They killed Kennedy. They killed Martin Luther King. They're in the high places in the government. They're in the mountains, so to speak. Edom owns and runs America. Lock, stock, and barrel. There's no doubt about it. You and I are not in control. As George Carlin said, if our vote mattered, they'd make it illegal. Well, they control the media. They control all of the social media on the internet. They control the search engines. Even the little guys that claim they're independent have got deals going on with the big search engines. Little fish get eaten by the big fish. So what are you going to do about it? You know, with the coming confusion that's coming, you need to arm yourself. And so, yeah, you can buy guns. You can arm yourself with firearms. That's okay. But nothing beats having the right mind. Nothing beats having the Holy Spirit and Yahweh on your side. And you have to do that, you have to access the mind of God. How do you access the mind of God? You do it by sitting on your ass and reading the Bible. And rereading the Bible. Read it for the stories. Read it for enjoyment. Just learn the names of the characters. Learn the plot. If you can learn anything from character development, anything about the law, natural law, anything about the blessings for obedience to the law, the curses for disobedience, those are good things. And if you're really lucky, you'll see certain passages repeated over and over, which means Yahweh, Creator Father, really wants us to pay attention to that. He wants us to learn from that. And you'll see him talking about the child sacrifice and the other horrible things that never even entered his mind that these bad guys were doing. They're still doing it today. And he'll also tell you about the 3 landmarks to which the Israelites were taken during the captivity when the Assyrians deported them from the northern half of Israel. Those are in the Bible about 5 times. So that's important to know. Why? Because from there we bolted across the Caucasus Mountains, and that's why we're called Caucasians, after the Caucasus Mountains. They don't want us to call ourselves white, or actually they want us to call ourselves white rather than Caucasian. Why is that? Why is that? I think it's because they don't want us to ask the simple question, why are we called Caucasian? Why are we considered Caucasoid? Oh, really? After the Caucasus Mountain Range, you say? And there's a place, a pass called the Darrell Pass. It's above 13,000 feet, clear just during the summer months. And on it, on the walls, chiseled in Paleo Hebrew, is inscribed, the gates of Israel. Generally speaking, our ancestors bolted through that pass somewhere around 650 BC, in my estimation. After we defeated the Babylonians, we joined up with the Medes and defeated the enemy together. We bolted across the mountains and across the river and broke into Europe and lands that hadn't been inhabited before and into the rest of the planet. So, we're the real deal. And these bastards are masquerading as if they're the chosen ones. That is the greatest identity theft in history. These people want to be God. They want to play God. Go look at some of the things George Soros has said. And he says he is God because he determines people's lives. He determines the fates of countries, their money system, all kinds of stuff he does. And we allow him to conspire and do that from our shores. We give him citizenship? Now that's being psychotic. Good day.